Welcome to the final Small Gas Engines Lab Activity Series from SDSU Ag Ed. Today we're finishing up the installation of all of the external parts of a 1650 series Briggs & Stratton Model 2100 series small engine. First thing we're going to do is we're going to install the control bracket. One of the important steps here is to remember to put that ground wire underneath that front screw as you're putting on the bracket again, so that it does have a good ground on the back of the kill switch. The next thing is we want to make sure that we're going to feed through what is the primary wire or the kill wire on the armature, so we can connect that later. Then we're going to put the flywheel on, and just a note here as we're installing the fan and whatnot, and kind of fast forward, we do not have a flywheel holder. At least I do not have one at my home lab. So what I ended up using is what I've done quite a few times in shop settings, is just simply use a pipe wrench. I've also used the compression tester clamp that comes in that kit to hold the crankshaft so that it cannot turn. Simply put the pipe wrench on the PTO side so it cannot turn, engage it with the key way so that you don't jack up the PTO at all, and just it does take a little bit more work when you don't have the flywheel holder, but as you kind of jockey it back and forth, and like before when you hear that click, then you are at the right setting. The next thing that we're going to install is the armature. So you're going to rotate the flywheel around to where the magnet faces the two armature studs that are coming out from the block. Make sure to connect that kill wire or the primary wire. Probably not the primary wire anymore on the old engines. The wire coming off was the primary, but anyway, we have a ruler from Briggs & Stratton that they give out at all their different booths, and they recommend using it as the spacer for your armature bolt or for your armature installation. It's quite handy. Simply let the armature stick down to the magnet with that ruler in between. Tighten those two down, and one thing I'll note on all these external parts, Briggs does recommend torque values. Having done this a number of years with high school students, I no longer recommend torquing any of them. We lightly snug them down, and depending on how forceful the group tends to be, I may recommend they use a nut driver instead of a wrench, especially on these armature bolts, because I've seen dozens of them stripped out and they just don't have much forgiveness, and it's really hard to heal a coil. You end up putting a little bit of JB Weld in there and rigging it together. But so again, I don't use torque values on any of those. Now we're putting on the governor arm, and another thing here is we're installing that governor spring. This governor arm is not really designed for multiple installations. That metal does bend really easily, so please be very, very careful. Just a reminder, on the inside of the engine, we twisted that governor shaft so that it was out of the way. So now we're going to bring it back so that the shaft is now actually touching that governor cup on the inside of the engine. And we're going to install the carburetor linkage and the carburetor, and then we're going to do a static adjustment on the governor. So we're going to lightly tighten or snug down the governor arm, but we can't do any final adjustments here until we actually do have the linkages and the carburetor installed. So just going to kind of snug that up. We've rotated the governor arm to where it's fairly tight against that cup on the inside, and then we're going to install the carburetor. One note here, just a quick reminder that we are installing some e-torques on this particular model, so make sure you're using the proper tools, and I'll remind you again on that later. The linkage goes through the little plastic grommet on the arm, and then the spring simply attaches on the hole right next to it. On the other end, that little plastic piece, you have to remember to pull it out of the way, slide the linkage in place, clip that back on the linkage, and then once it's been clicked in place, then you install that spring. And remember, that spring's job is simply to try and reduce some of the vibration so that won't come apart as the engine's running. Now that we have it snugged on there, like I said, Briggs does use torque values on here. I do not torque this. I simply snug it up to avoid long-term problems. So this is an E-Torx. I believe, if memory serves, this is number 6. Now that we have the carburetor in place, we're going to review the steps for static governor adjustment. So we want to make sure the governor arm nut is loose, that the shaft will move. We want to make sure the throttle will actually move. We want to make sure we can get it to wide open throttle. While it's at wide open throttle, we're going to turn the governor shaft in the direction of the idle until it comes in contact with that cup on the inside of the crankcase. And once it's in contact with that cup, then we can go ahead and tighten down the governor arm. And wide open throttle is, on this particular model, is all the way to the left, and the springs are trying to pull it that way. Remember, the governor spring always tries to speed the engine up. So with the governor springs working properly, and we can see that it is in wide open throttle, we once again bring the paddle against it, against that cup, and now we're ready to tighten that down. And please just lightly snug this. This will bend out of the way, and then you'll be ordering a new governor arm if you bend it too much. So now we're going to go and install some of the rest of the external parts. As you're installing this backer plate on the air filter, remember to connect the hose back to the breather so that you're pulling in your clean air into the crankcase. The shields on the outside, simply some small little screws. Again, no torque values on these. Everything we're just doing to it snug. We are only going to run this engine for 15 minutes, and then it'll go back into storage for the next group. If this is a personal owned engine that's going back out to work on equipment, then definitely use those torque values and torque everything down properly. But this is a school engine, and we want to be able to reuse it for the next decade or so. So lots of little pieces that'll be installed, and fast forward, this is only a few minutes. In real time, this can take a considerable amount of time, depending on how organized you were as you took everything off and how much is moved from when you started. As you put on the blower housing, just some notes that there are little tangs that it has to go under and over, so just be aware that you have to get those all in the right place. Last of all, we're going to put this plastic housing on the front. Make sure that both the wires are on the back of that kill switch, otherwise you'll have to remove this and reconnect those wires again. We're going to put the air filter cover back in place, and then we're going to test for spark to make sure that everything was actually put together. And hopefully you can see it. There's a lot of movement. We recorded this a few times to try and get it, and you can just see the spark in one of the videos. But that is kind of your last test once you have the pull rope, and you can pull it fast enough as to test for spark, and then you are completed with your installation. You can go ahead, add gasoline, and do the carburetor adjustments and governor adjustments after that. Thanks for watching.